Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Huffman. Hope you're having a fine day or a fine afternoon or whenever you're watching this. Okay. So we're still kind of in the very early goings of this new unit, which is the actual formation of our government. And again, that might sound pretty boring. It might sound, well, I kind of had civics class. Why do I need to hear this again? This is all very instrumental for the identity of the United States moving forward, not just in the short term, kind of in the early 1800s and again, even leading all the way up to the Civil War. But I would say we're still, in many ways, as a nation, grappling with some of the very same problems, debates, and issues that were raised in the Constitution. And in many ways, it kind of gave birth to so many of the different ideological fissures that we're, again, still dealing with in our own modern political parties are grappling with even as we speak. Okay, so the Constitutional Convention, again, those Articles of Confederation weren't getting the job done. And everyone realized, you know what, we need to come together and do something a little different. Okay. So in May of 1787, Philadelphia, naturally, kind of the capital of the United States at this time, is going to serve as the place for all these states to gather and to come together and try to work out some new constitution for them. Okay. And Philadelphia's Pennsylvania State House specifically, where that happened. Okay. As you can imagine, this is also an all-star lineup of 55 delegates total. Okay. So they're all across the various states. And as you can imagine, many of the people who are showing up at these things are kind of the regional power players or governors, maybe state senators, state congressmen, people who have experience in government, especially those who are very argumentative, very talkative, and are very willing to stick up not only for their states, but for their regions as a whole, because this is going to be a little bit of a regional tussle as well, regional wrestling match. So, again, mostly these people are going to be the attorney class, right? People who are used to getting up and speaking and arguing on a daily basis, but there will be some planners or merchants as well. Okay, but again, practically everyone who shows up to this convention are going to have some experience in colonial, state, or even national government. As you can imagine, also, a great many of our founding fathers are present here to have their voices and arguments heard. Okay. Now, two of our biggest founding fathers, actually, though, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, are both actually currently in Europe when all this is being hashed out and argued. Okay. So they're actually far away and they're kind of writing back and forth to some of their friends to say, hey, what's going on here? What are the issues on the table? How can we maybe help? Okay. Also, as you can imagine, Virginia is going to be the most prepared delegation. Okay. They have all their ducks in a row. Again, one of the oldest democracies in the colonies is going to be that House of Burgesses, right? So they have a rich tradition and a rich legacy of showing up and having their arguments and voices heard. Okay. Again, Jefferson is away in Europe at this time, but his buddy, James Madison, is going to be there kind of sticking up for a lot of Virginia's ideas about how the government should be run and how it should be organized. Okay. And thankfully, he keeps a lot of detailed records of the event, which is very valuable to us as historians because largely the event was closed to the public to kind of ensure, hey, we're all going to be honest and have an open discussion of the issues at hand. So thanks to James Madison, he kept a lot of notes. And that's why we know so much about what happened, because at the time, everyone was kind of kept out. The media certainly, the newspapers certainly wanted to know what was going on, but very little actually filtered out. Okay. So again, that's the Constitutional Convention, kind of a big epicenter of, hey, how are we going to move forward as a nation? As you can imagine, also, George Washington himself is there. Now, again, George Washington doesn't have as much experience running government as he does running the military on the battlefield, but he's going to be kind of chosen by all sides as, hey, that he's a good guy to kind of actually preside over this convention as the president. So he's going to kind of be elected almost unanimously, I think maybe unanimously by everybody, as the kind of moderate president who doesn't have a lot of ideological buttons to push, unlike some of the other ones. He's just there to kind of make sure the whole ship is sailing smoothly. Okay, again, Virginia, the most prepared delegation, and so they're going to have kind of one of the most thorough plans when it comes to how this whole government should be set up. Okay, and this Virginia plan, chiefly the work of James Madison. So again, I kind of was talking about with Founding Fathers Project, that he's a little bit lower on the totem pole as far as Founding Fathers, but he's going to be incredibly instrumental in this convention as a whole. Okay, so what's Madison saying? All right, we need to get rid of the Articles of Confederation. This new national government needs to make laws binding the states and together as a whole nation, and we need to be able to raise money through taxes, because as it previously existed in the Articles of Confederation, that there was no real system to raise taxes for the federal government. All the taxes went to the state governments. But hey, if we're going to be a federal government, we need some money to function, right? So that means we're going to have taxes to fund that. Okay. Also very instrumental, bicameral, which meant there was going to be two houses. Okay. Voters elect members of one house. And so if you're a regular person, you're voting on electing members of that house. But then there's also kind of an upper chamber where the state governments nominate, but ultimately are elected by the first house. So again, one house of government, the people actually directly elect. The second one, the state governments nominate people, but then the first house votes on them. Okay. Also very important, the number of representatives in these houses are based on population. So you might be thinking, okay, who is that going to help or benefit? The larger states, right? Virginia, New York, Massachusetts, all those states that were already influential are going to be even more influential in this system. Okay, so that's going to be seen as, hey, it should be based on population. Everybody should have a say, but naturally, shouldn't the states who have a bigger population also have a say? Okay, so it's a way to kind of give a lot of power ultimately to Virginia. Naturally, it's called the Virginia Plan. Madison's looking out for Virginia, but also those other influential, important states like New York and like Massachusetts. So again, he's saying we need to get rid of the Articles of Confederation. Pretty much everybody agreed on that. And we need to make sure all the states are bound together as a single nation. Pretty much everybody also agreed on that. And also we need to raise money from the federal government through taxes. Not everybody was 100% on board with that notion. But again, that bicameral legislature, two houses, one, here we go, people directly elect them, okay, average citizens. Two, the people, the state governments nominate people in that house, and then the actual people in the first house then vote on them, okay? So again, naturally, that benefited all the larger states. Meanwhile, a lot of the smaller states are saying, hey, wait a minute. That's kind of giving you a lot of power and not us as much power. So an alternative is going to be the New Jersey Plan. And this is going to be a counter proposal written by William Paterson of, the area that will be eventually called Paterson, New Jersey, named after him. That this is, again, going to be something that actually helps the smaller states a little bit, okay? So he's saying, okay, yeah, we need to make the central government stronger, but maybe we shouldn't get rid of the Articles of Confederation entirely, okay? And maybe we should just take it and kind of adjust things about it, okay? And one thing that's big about this New Jersey plan is that, hey, we need a single house, not these two houses, a single house where every state's represented equally, right? So right now we got 13 states. Why can't we just have, one state, one vote, right? That makes some sense. And so everyone's going to be equally represented that way. Also, the power to tax and regulate trade is going to be added. Okay, so this is the New Jersey plan. And again, if you're kind of from a smaller state that don't have as many people, naturally you're going to kind of float over to that New Jersey plan because you're going to have a better, kind of a grander say than under the Virginia plan, which again, that Virginia plan, that's only really going to be benefiting the big states. Again, the Virginias, the Pennsylvanias, the Massachusetts, the New Yorks, right? Smaller states like a New Jersey, which New Jersey actually has a lot of people living there now, but at the time, not as many. So that's going to be a problem for those small states who want to make sure, hey, we want to be represented too. So again, there's a lot of debate. Do we want to go with the Virginia plan or the New Jersey plan? And it's getting actually pretty heated because both sides want to make sure that when this new government's set up, that they have a say in it, right? And thankfully, there's going to be some compromises that come about to make sure that both sides are going to end up being happy. Okay, naturally, the delegates, they find themselves being divided geographically, right? The small states feel left out. Also, the slavery. How is slavery going to fit into this? Should slavery be fit into the population? That's also going to be a major sticking point. While other states little more northern states are saying we shouldn't have slavery to begin with. Okay, but again, that's kind of a minority position. Even most people who didn't like slavery in the North were still not willing to take it away just yet. Okay. So, to try to iron out all these compromises, a special committee set up, chaired by Ben Franklin, again, somebody that all sides kind of respected because he was in his last years actually at this point and not in the best health. But this was really the kind of last big task he took on before he passed away. He's going to chair this special committee and appointed to try to figure out and negotiate a compromise. Okay, and this included moderates in this mostly, which again are people willing to change their minds. And this does result in the Great Compromise of the Constitutional Convention. And this was suggested primarily by Roger Sherman of Connecticut, which itself was a smaller state. Okay, he said, all right, how about this? Maybe we have 2 houses. Now, that goes back to the Virginia plan. But 1 house, we're going to base that on, population, right? Like the Virginia plan. So, yeah, you know what? Bigger states, they should have a certain, maybe more of a say than the smaller states in the larger house. But then we have an upper house where every state has 2 senators, right? Where that way, the totally big states aren't going to totally run over the small states. So, as it turns out, this is the system we have now, there's going to be a great compromise in the sense that, again, in 1 house, yeah, it's based on population, and that's fair to the big states. But on the other hand, the smaller house, but actually more important, more equal, is going to be the Senate, where every state has 2 senators. Okay, so again, this is the system ultimately we're going to go with, and one that we're still existing with today, where again, the House of Representatives in Congress, it depends on how many people live in that state, how many representatives they get, right? So naturally, the bigger states now, like California, Texas, New York, Florida, states that have a lot of people in them, they're going to get a little bit more representation. But everyone, even the smaller states, like a Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, right? Those smaller states, they do have some representation, but not a whole lot. Meanwhile, in the Senate, every state has 2 senators, right? So California has 2 senators. Montana has 2 senators. South Carolina has 2 senators, right? So it's a little bit of a mix, right? That's why it's called the Great Compromise. We're taking kind of the Virginia plan, we're taking the New Jersey plan, and we're kind of mixing them together. And for the most part, both sides realize, you know what, we need to pass something, and so we're willing to kind of agree to that, okay? So that accomplished that. But now we got to deal with the sticky issue of slavery, okay? Naturally, the South wanted to count slave populations for the purposes of representation. But what's the problem with that, right? They're not even allowed to be free. They're not even allowed to vote. They're not even allowed to have rights. And yet you're trying to count them as kind of figures of population. That's not only, evil and wrong that you still have slavery, but also that's just disingenuous, right? Because, yeah, you might have a lot of slaves there, but that shouldn't count in your population because you're not, really, they don't have any rights. They're not functioning in any democratic way. Right? So is that really fair? But again, these slave states, they realize this is a way to boost up our population numbers. So we want to make sure that they are counted. Okay. And I would say quite shamefully, a compromise results out of this. Okay. The 3/5 compromise, where for every 5 slaves you have in your state, they're going to count 3 of them. Right. So 3/5, basically you're saying each of these slaves are 3/5 of a person or 60% of a person for the purposes of adding to your population or the tax revenue that you will be getting. Okay. So again, what we're implicitly saying quite clearly in this is, hey, if you're a free white man, you're 100% of a person. If you're an enslaved black man, you're only 60% of a person. I would say they're being treated not nearly even 60% of a person if you're being enslaved. Okay. So this is going to be a way to placate the South, make the South happy. There are going to be some northern states who see this for what it is as a disgrace and a fraud, right? Who are saying, hey, what gives? We're saying these people are 60% of people and they're not even actually functioning as members of society. That's wrong. That's immoral. So there are going to be some people who call this out, but even them are willing to kind of compromise on this and say, you know what? We got to get something passed. We'll just do this. Okay. Also, a big part of this, and these southern states are very scared that there's going to be some bans on slavery, and they don't want that to happen. So they also say, okay, you know what? Congress couldn't tax exports, which was big for the South, but also that Congress is not going to touch the slavery issue until 1808, which at this point is about 20 years away. So it's like 1787, well, really about like nearly about 15 to 20 years away in 1808. And everybody's like, okay, fine, we won't have to. No, wait a minute. No, that is about 20 years. Okay, I was doing my math wrong. So about 20 years down the line, we'll touch slavery again, okay? And this is kind of a classic governmental problem. This is a problem we're still dealing with, where people at the time don't want to deal with this very big, important issue, so they're just going to kick the can down the road and have people in the future deal with it, right? We've always dealt with that in American democracy. People not wanting to do the job at the time, and so they're going to revisit it later. And then when we get to 1808, as you can imagine, they're also going to kick the can down the road. So, and many of these same people wouldn't even be in power by that point. It would be other people, right? It's 20 years, that goes by quick, but, replaces a lot of people. So, also couldn't impose any higher taxes on slave importation. So the short answer for how slavery fits into the writing of the Constitution is it's basically ignored, right? The only way that slavery is really acknowledged officially is in this three-fifths compromise saying, you know what, we're going to count slaves as basically 60% of slaves. We're going to count them as part of the population. And as a result, these slave states are going to get more representation in Congress, right? Which, again, is not only is slavery already an evil, immoral institution, right? Now we're also saying that, these slave states are going to get power that they don't deserve because they're not actually freeing the slaves, right? Again, very problematic, very insidious, but it's going to be one of the kind of more shameful aspects of this overall positive, successful constitutional convention. Okay, so finalizing the Constitution, delegates now set up this system of amendments because that's going to be a key sticking point, which I'll talk about a little bit tomorrow, that we need to make sure amendments are going to get into the Constitution because naturally we're not going to be happy with this for the entirety of American history, right? We're going to need to make some changes here and there. So they set that system up, but they'd make it an intentionally difficult process because we shouldn't be able to change the Constitution very easily, right? There needs to be a genuine need to change it. So they kind of set up this whole system where must be proposed with 2/3 vote in both houses, and then 2/3 of the states have to call on this kind of individual constitutional convention to then propose these new amendments. And then state legislatures have to, by 3/4, that's 75%, pass off on it, or a convention by the states by 75%. So again, very hard to change the Constitution. We've done it a grand total of 27 times so far, okay, which sounds like a lot, but over the course of American history is actually not that many. Plus, 10 of those, we'll talk about tomorrow, the Bill of Rights, are going to be kind of baked into its immediate passing. So really, we've only changed the Constitution about 17 times, right? Which, again, sounds like a lot, but again, we're talking about nearly 250 years here. That's not all that many times, right? So overall, this was a grand success. And here's some quotes I'll share with you. Washington, he called this little short of a miracle, right? That we had all these states that had all these different ideological boundaries came together to get this done. John Adams had, and again, he was in France at the time, or in England, doing some stuff, and he heard news about this single greatest effort of national deliberation that the world has ever seen. So again, he saw this from afar, and Jefferson saw this from afar. They actually weren't involved in the writing of it, even though they were keeping close tabs on it. But again, this is a grand success, right? That all these states were able to come together and pass this founding document, this setting up, how America's going to be governed, okay? But again, mostly a grand success, but that issue of slavery was not totally resolved, right? And a lot of people said, well, we just need to pass something. We'll just put it off, which I understand that impulse. But at the same time, this is an immoral, disgusting institution that was basically just put off and shrugged at and said, well, we'll deal with it later, right? And when that 1808 rolls around, they're going to shrug and say, well, we'll deal with it later. And it just keeps going on and on and on until we have to fight a whole civil war about it, okay? But for the short term, this gets the job done, okay? So tomorrow, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the actual ratification process, which now this has been kind of finalized in Philadelphia. Now the states have to sign off on this whole thing, right? And that whole path to signing off is going to be beset by its own ideological, political, geographical, social issues and problems. Okay. So this is Mr. Huffman signing off for today. Hope you're all enjoying your day so far and everything's going well. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Take care.